I'm Brice Futch.
And I'm Tony Melton.
And this is The Way Forward.
Hello, welcome to this episode of The Way Forward podcast. This is Tony Melton. I'm here with Brice Futch. Today we're going to learn about him and his story and about this podcast. This podcast was his brainchild. We want to learn exactly why we are offering this to you and how this matches with his heart, his vision, and his hopes. So welcome, Brice.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's a good introduction.
So tell me about you. Who are you?
Yeah, so I live in Holly Springs. I'm married to my wife, Brooke. She is definitely the best thing that's happened to me in a very long time. We're expecting our first child in April, so that's very exciting. Originally, I'm from Florida. I'm an 8th generation Floridian. My family lived about 15 square miles from where we homesteaded in, I think, 1840. So, yeah, the joke is we don't get out much. But here we are. And I came by way of upstate New York. So my wife and I both went to a very small Christian college for a year called Word of Life Bible Institute. And their headquarters is in New York, but they also have a campus in Florida. And we both went to Florida, but different years. And I was working for Word of Life at the time when we met. She does not remember meeting me, but I very distinctly remember meeting her. And somehow, thanks to Facebook, we became friends on there. And we just kind of kept in touch with each other off and on. And then we had a mutual friend that reintroduced us about 5 years later. He's a pastor in Florida, and he actually was the one that performed our wedding, which was really cool. And so when we were dating and it was getting serious, I said, I need to move to Georgia because Brooke was not leaving. And so here I am. I came down in 2018 and had a small business for a couple of years, and then I became a full-time member of the fire department, a local fire department here in 2019. So that's how I ended up here. In a nutshell. Yeah,
that's a good one. So leave it to a girl to get your
They'll
8th
take
generation from Florida.
Right. Yeah, it was it was good. I really like it here though. It's nice because the mosquitoes are not as big, and you have 4 seasons, which is good. Florida, you just have hot, more hot, less hot, and then hot again. So
you're a guy that's got a lot going on.
Try to stay busy.
You're in the fire department as a firefighter and an EMT.
Yes, we're all hazard departments.
So but there's also another aspect to your life that's taking up quite a bit of time.
Yeah, so I decided that grad school would be a good idea, which
when a baby's on the way.
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
it all just has to go together. So I started over the summer taking courses actually through Harvard Extension School. I'm studying international relations with 2 graduate certificates in international security and nuclear deterrence. And nuclear deterrence was not something that I thought was of any interest to me at all. And then I took a class for the international security part. And the way we game out our nuclear options is just very fascinating to me, primarily because it's scary. Like there's very little. Yeah. We have moved far away from having a real strategy. So anyway, that's something that I'm interested in studying a little bit more. And I only have to take a couple extra classes to get it, so it works out well.
Yeah. So you're nearing the end of that.
So I'm yes and no. So I'm nearing the end of my first graduate certificate. So basically, the way it goes is kind of like a waterfall. So the classes you take count for your degree as a whole. But I'm getting ready to finish the international security certificate first, and then from there I'll move to nuclear deterrence, and then from there I'll finish the degree as a whole. So I'm almost done with international security. I still probably have about a year and a half left total for the rest of the program. So
that's great.
Yeah.
So you're going to be a father in April. Yes. Well, you already are a father.
Yes.
Your child will be born in April.
Right.
That's great. When are you done with the whole degree?
Yeah, so we're not totally. To be honest, I'm not totally sure, and the reason why is the department that I work with is offering a paramedic school, and I'm hoping to put in and get into that. And so if I do, I'll take about a year off, and so we'll have the baby born in April. We're having a girl, so that's really exciting. We are naming her after my grandmother and my mother-in-law, so it'll be Carolyn Marie. And so that'll come in April, and then paramedic school will actually start at the end of April as well, if I get in. So I will finish paramedic school a year and a half later, and then I'll come back and try and knock out the rest of this degree. So probably about 3 years before I'm done with school. So, yeah.
Tell me about why you wanted to start this podcast.
So really it started a few years ago. Just having conversations with friends. Where I lived in New York, we rented an apartment above a coffee shop, which was wonderful. Spent way too much of my money there, but it was great. And so we would just sit and talk in the evenings, me and my two roommates. We all have been interested in politics, but it wasn't necessarily something that we were really studying at the time. But I love a good documentary. I kind of go on these binges with documentaries. So I'll watch something. So like I love to smoke cigars, and I got into that by watching a documentary about cigars and how they're made and the history there and all of that.
Yeah.
And then the same thing became true about Scotch. Now, fortunately, I don't binge the Scotch, but I do binge the documentary. And so I watched one on China called it's called the New Silk Road, and it's about China's Belt and Road Initiative. And the way they do international aid and international projects are very different than the way the United States does. And China, I think, is former Ambassador John Huntsman said that China is probably the best long-term strategic thinker in the world. That's just what they do really well. And we are very great in the United States of short-term thinking, short-term strategy. And that difference that makes, I think, though, is really important. And we need to be looking to China not now, but 20 years from now, and where are they going? What are they trying to do? And so we were talking about it, and the guys that we were talking with were just like, we've never really sat down and considered this. But it's really important to us as, small town Americans. Like, it makes a big difference in the way we live our life, and makes a big difference in the businesses in our community. And so that was kind of where the idea came from, to take these bigger ideas about why should somebody care about China, right? Like, why does China make a difference to you in your life and your family? And kind of try and break it up into smaller pieces and make it a little bit more understandable, and to present information to people that have just never really thought about it before. So that's kind of where it came from, and we'll see how it goes. Like I said, this first season is going to be on China, and got some good guests lined up, and here we are.
I find you so intriguing, Brice. I mean, on the one hand, you're in public service, you're a firefighter and an EMT. One of my closest friends is in that same exact job. There's nothing to me that's more local, meaning even myopic, in that when there's a crisis, you are exclusively focused on helping that person. You're not thinking about China whenever you get home at 7 a.m. in the morning. And yet, you're also a guy who's studying at Harvard and thinking about these global issues, nuclear deterrence, which is probably one of the most macro things.
It's a bit much.
You hold together this micro, macro, this broad view and this non-broad. I don't know coffee this morning to think of the good term for that, but in many ways, I see that as really the purpose of this podcast, right? And you're just it's good to see you really living out that twofold aspect to your person and putting it into this. But how do you coconnect that? What do you hope other people get out of this podcast?
Well, first, I think that's really kind. I appreciate that a lot. I think the goal for folks is to, like, de Tocqueville, when he wrote Democracy in America, talked a lot about this. So did John Adams and Sam Adams as well. But the idea that our government works best when you have an informed electorate. And we have gotten to a point where I think the 24-hour news cycle is really damaging to the way people think. Right? Like, we don't, it's bad. Like, we'll hear the same news story 17 different times within a 6-hour period, because there's nothing else going on. Like, the fact that there's nothing else going on should tell you there shouldn't be news right now. Like, it's not needed. It adds to this, to an angst. It makes you worry. It makes you concerned and stressed when it shouldn't, right? But we should look at these big ideas and be informed about them. Right. So, and hopefully this podcast will be a way to kind of get out of talking points. Right. And like, it also doesn't do us any favors to have these 30-second sound bites. Right. Because that's how the news works today is you get some politician to stand up and they'll give you a 30-second sound bite about an idea or about a topic or a bill that they're producing or a bill that they're opposing. And that's it. There's no room for nuance. And nuance to me is really where all of these things come together. Nuance, I think, also shows us that the people that we're opposed to politically, for the most part, there are some that I think that are a bit out there, but for the most part, they're reasonable people, and they want the similar outcome that we do. They just have a very different way of going about it, right? But I think there's a lot of things that are big that if we just took 30 minutes and sat down and talked about them, we could get a decent understanding out there about facts, objective facts. And why they matter and why they should be important, because they are. And I think as we go through this, people will start to kind of see like how this affects their daily life, and not in a way that produces stress or angst or anxiety, but in a way that says, I can make a difference from right here in Canton, Georgia.
Right. That's great. I'm super excited to see where this podcast goes. I know this is something that you asked me to come and participate on, and you're the one that knows much more about these things. And having studied, at the highest levels about this stuff.
We'll see.
But I can see the value here.
Sure.
I know for me, picking through what's important, and what as a Christian, and as a citizen, what's important that I know, and what do I need to know about it?
Sure.
Because I've become so exhausted by the 24-hour news cycle. I can't stand it.
Right, and it makes you not want to learn anything.
Right, and I know that's not appropriate either.
Yeah.
So having a podcast about key issues, hearing, as you said, objective facts from people that are reasonable and knowledgeable about it is really good. Very intrigued.
Yeah, so, I think it's going to be great. I'm super excited about it.
Tough question.
Yeah.
Where do you think that this desire to where do you think the seeds of this podcast were before you watched that documentary? Like, has this always been a part of your personality, or what in your past? Yeah.
So I would say yes. I think generally, so I was the last year for the millennials. So I get pegged as a millennial, and rightly so. And a lot of people say we're the generation of why, right? We want to know why something matters. Why is it important? Why should I care? Why should I follow this rule? But I think at an even deeper level, it comes from my faith and from my Christianity, right? Like the death of Christ came. It makes everything whole, right? Like for we as Christians, that redemptive value is there, and it's not to make me less human. It's to make me more fully human, right? Because we were created in God's image, and He called us good, and then we fell in sin. So to err is not human. To err is fallen, right? And so as we go about doing the redemptive work from that cultural commission in Genesis, where it's form and fill the earth, these are the questions that we have to ask. We have to ask, why does the way China treat Muslims in a remote province matter to us, and how are we going to work through that? And I think having that understanding, I've also always enjoyed like why things are the way they are. One of my favorite writers is Malcolm Gladwell, and he does that really great, really well. In Outliers, for example, I think is just fascinating. I wish I could remember more specific details from the story, but he talks about Canadian hockey players and how the majority of them were born within the same month. I think it was January, because of their age cutoff, right? So like coaches thought that these kids who had an extra age of growth were just more naturally talented, so they would give them better coaching. But in reality, they were just a year older, so they had more coordination and all that kind of stuff. So finding out things like that just is like, oh my gosh, that's the best thing I've ever heard. And so I think, we're obviously not Malcolm Gladwell by any stretch of the imagination, as this podcast will prove. But I do think taking a deeper look at these things is important.
I wonder, I don't know if this is true for you, but, we both came from traditions in the church that taught the rapture.
Yes.
Right? That, this world, the church is just going to be gone, and the rest of it's going to burn.
Right.
But both of us have kind of left traditions that teach that. And there is this reclamation of this, as you mentioned, the cultural mandate that we find in Genesis, that God still cares for the world. Right. And that politics and the gospel actually do have something to do with each other.
They do.
And even if there is an aspect of judgment coming, God's desire is for the earth to be made whole. Right. And that redemption will involve the new heavens and the new earth. I didn't know if you could comment on just your own journey from that kind of it's all going to burn. We're gonna all that's going to be left of us is our shoes and our shoestrings.
Right. Yeah. So I think, for full disclosure from my dispensational friends, I don't think I'm fully away from that ending. Okay. I think I disagree with how we get to that ending. Right. So in the past, I had a mentor that I think just the world of, and I still think the world of him. But he had this phrase that he would say that the only thing that matters when you get to heaven is how many people you took with you. And while I think that is incredibly important, like the gospel is central to everything we do, and making disciples is crucial, God cares about a lot more than just that, right? Yeah. Like he is so huge and infinite that all of these other things matter. And really, for me, that came out of the Colson Fellows Program. So the Colson Center in Colorado Springs has a 9-month Fellows Program that I would highly recommend to you. But it's a deep dive in apologetics and worldview, and reading C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It talks, the how crucial education is in the life of a person, and like it's not just like I do think Christianity is for more than just Christians. I think it's through Acton Institutes. They had a series called For the Life of the World, and I'm trying to remember the guy's name is Dr. Stephen. I can't think of his last name, but anyway, he said that Christianity was given for the life of the world, right? And Christ, the common grace that we see through God's goodness, can be brought about by Christians and brought out through Christians. Right. And so it's not a Christian in search of a theocracy or a government ruled by God. Whereas I do think that will eventually be the end of it. That's how it's all going to happen at the end. That's not the meantime. It's the theology of the trenches, right? It's us working together to bring about a better world for the glory of God and for the good of man, right? Yeah, Christianity does good things. Like for example, there's a anthropologist. I think he was an anthropologist, Tom Holland, who I used to think was like the movie star Tom Holland. I was like, oh no, that's not different guy. But Tom Holland talks about how, and he's an atheist, that the reason women's rights came about in history was because of the church, right? Because of the way the church looks at women as valuable, which, for a non-believer listening to this podcast might seem just completely foreign based off the way it's talked about today. But if you look historically, that's where it came from. And it brought about all of these really good societal, social changes. Civil rights, for example, right? Human rights is rooted in the biblical idea that every human has inherent dignity. And we would say it's because they're made in the image of God, right? So I think all of that goes together, and it makes a huge difference in the way you see in your world and interact with it.
All right, another tough one since you handled that one so well. Every person has their touch points, their things that drive them, their sense of vocation in the world. Mm-hmm. What are some things that are important to you? Why do you do what you do? Why are you in this work? Both as an EMT, firefighter, and also as a thinker and teacher of your fellow man. Yeah,
I think it goes back to the idea that it all matters to God, right? So the politics thing came about when I was traveling for Word of Life, and we would stay in people's homes whenever we would go. We were on a music team that promoted the school and our youth camps, and whenever we would stay in someone's home, you get to hear their story, right? Mm-hmm. And when we were talking to folks, politics, it wasn't like we had conversations specifically about politics, but when we talked about what's important to them, what's weighing on their hearts, what's weighing on their minds, all of these folks from Maine to Mississippi to Michigan to Florida, they all expressed very similar things, just in a slightly different way. And as a marketing kind of guy and like a campaign guy, like, to me, it was just this realization that everybody has the same issues. Everybody wants very similar things. We just slightly disagree on how to get there. And so I think having conversations like this, having that opportunity for nuance, I think will help give us opportunities to move the ball forward politically. Mm-hmm. But then as far as just the daily work that we do, it's because it matters to God. Everybody has dignity, and whether they're, some guy who's strung out on drugs or, the governor of the state, like it doesn't matter who you are, you deserve that equal treatment, right? And so when we show up on scene as firefighters and EMTs, we don't care who you are, what you look like, where you're from, what your socioeconomic status is, how much drugs you've done or haven't done over the course of your life. Like, you're going to get the same treatment, and we're going to do everything we can to make you better. And again, that goes back to that redemptive nature of Christianity and of Christ. And I think it allows Christians to view that work a little differently. It doesn't make it less heavy, doesn't make it less hard. It just it gives you a different outlook on it, which I think gives you a lot of encouragement and helps keep you positive.
That's great. Awesome. Thank you, Brice.
Of course. That was great. I appreciate it. Thanks for all the great questions. And looking forward to hosting this series with you. It's going to be really good. Me too.
It's going to be fun.
Thank you so much, Tony, for those wonderful questions. Next week, I'll be able to return the favor, and we'll be finding out more about you and who you are and how you ended up here in Marietta. Really appreciate the time today. And folks, please make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And we look forward to you joining us next week. I'm Brice Futch.
I'm Tony Melton.
And you've been listening to The Way Forward.